All right, thank you very much. Now we're talking about benchmarking as a creativity technique. And overall, I think of this as something called lateral benchmarking, thinking outside the benchmark box and trying to see what else we can do with it. Now, of course, benchmarking is a powerful technique in all kinds of disciplines, not merely project management. And all of the basics of benchmarking still work, and I still endorse them. But with so many parts of management, we just find that there are things we're leaving on the table, things we value that we could get just by reaching out and taking it. So let's take a look at how benchmarking can go beyond being a mechanism for process or product improvement and use it to maximize strategic opportunity. Now, when I think of it as the fundamentals of benchmarking, for the purposes of the webinar, I'm going to call it benchmarking 1.0. All benchmarking at every level at some root is about similarity and comparison. We take some business process, some metric, some identifiable comparable characteristic, find a comparable, and use that as a way to measure where we are, determine where we might need to be. Sometimes we want to hit some absolute standard or goal. Other times we just want to be better than the competition, in which case we always have to keep a close eye on what the competition is and what the competition is doing. We must, in any benchmarking situation, have specific indicators that allow direct comparison. Now, it's used in many, many, many different ways, and in particular, it's used with continuous improvement. In fact, its original application in the business sector is tied in to the very, very early stages, the earliest stages of what turned into the modern quality movement. The Walter Schuhart's statistical process control, among other things, used benchmarking all the way through. Again, similarity. We must have a similar process, a similar business, a similar product characteristics, similar distribution, similar market, similar sector, similarity. But, you can't compare apples to oranges and get a lot of useful data. Now, benchmarking is used in a lot of different areas. Now, benchmarking itself dates back, the term it comes from the mid-19th century in the arms manufacturing business. In order to test rifles, they would take the rifle barrel, they would take it and fasten it to a bench to keep it nice and stable, and then they would fire ammunition through it and then see what the spread was of the bullets as a measure of accuracy in a high-performance rifle. And so the benchmark was the standardized way that could be told. Now, benchmarking has moved into a lot of different areas. Process benchmarking has been really integral to a lot of quality initiatives. We compare ourselves, and they're two best in class. When engineer Taiichi Ohno at Toyota developed the Kanban card system for inventory management, which became just-in-time inventory, he had identified a process benchmarks and improved them. And immediately, of course, with the success of just-in-time inventory, people started looking and say, let's benchmark ourselves against Toyota. Financial benchmarks, we may or may not be personally involved in the financial part of our organization, but we all have to deal with financial benchmarks. We have numbers we have to meet, budgets we have to stay within, financial metrics that we would like to achieve. Financial metrics for benchmarking are everywhere, probably one of the biggest areas outside of industry where it's used. We frequently benchmark performance. Here is our function, our department, our area, and let's look at how other people do it. My first real job out of college, I was lucky enough to be part of the team that built the National Air and Space Museum at the Smithsonian Institution. I mean, I was as junior as you could get and still be called a member of the professional staff. But a lot of a number of the jobs that I did there. One of the jobs was setting up some public contact operations. If you went to the movie theater, the planetarium, how do we get you in and out? What did we do? I got to I got an excuse to go to an amusement park on the company dime. Although I wasn't there to ride the rides, I was there to actually measure the cues, count performance, and develop metrics that we could use. So benchmarking. Products. How does our product stack up against the competition? What are our features? What are our benefits? What are our numbers? What are our metrics? Strategic benchmarking. Where are we in terms of the organization as a whole? Where's our market going? What kinds of things do we have to look out for? One of the most common mistakes in business is when the ground has fundamentally changed, people continue to think, well, no, it hasn't, and they continue with it. The Sewell Avery, who was head of Montgomery Ward department stores during the Great Depression, when World War II came along and the economy was boosted, he thought as soon as the war was over, everything was going to go back to the way it was and a crash. And so he decided that his company was not going to expand. They were going to develop cash reserves. They were going to hold on to it, let everybody else expand after the war. And then when it all went bankrupt, he'd buy it all up. Well, it became clearer and clearer and clearer that things had changed, that no, we weren't going to go back to the Great Depression, but Sewell Avery just kept on. And Montgomery Ward went from being the absolute industry leader in the department store sector to down in the middle of the pack, based on not understanding the strategic benchmarking information that was available. Functional benchmarking, how does our function work? How many people are we processing per hour? How fast do you get through checkout? Amazon, Jeff Bezos is notorious for making sure that everything he does a lot of benchmarking and metrics. How long does it take you to check out? How many steps do you have to go through? Compare that to the competitors, but also against absolute standards, because the fewer the better. We benchmark against. We can benchmark against ourselves. We can say, here's how we're doing right now. Let's see if we can improve. We can benchmark against competitors in our class, or we can benchmark against competitors that are best in class, even if we ourselves would have a ways to go to get there. Because there are still things we can learn, even from people who are way above us. Otherwise, I'm a writer. I learn a lot from just about anything I read. But it's not that Shakespeare's position in English literature is in any imminent danger from me, but it doesn't mean I don't pay attention, and it doesn't mean that I don't do some comparison, however badly I look in that way. Operational benchmarking, the flow charting approach that Deming was so famous for, the analysis of the time and motion studies, the kinds of things that went back all the way to Frederick Taylor and the beginnings of modern management. So benchmarking is a very key area. But what else can you do? I mentioned Walter Schuhart, who was head of quality control at the Western Electric Hawthorne plant. And if you've ever heard of the Hawthorne experiment or the Hawthorne effect, that's where that took place. One of the people who worked there was named Deming, W. Edwards Deming. And Deming was there when some of the very, very first steps in formal quality were done. And then management got threatened, made them all quit. In disgust, Deming quit, joined the Census Bureau as a statistician. And after World War II, he went to Japan with some other people from the Census Bureau to help Japan conduct its first post-war census. Well, he ended up getting involved with people in Japanese industry and talking to them, and explained a lot of the stuff that had been done at the Hawthorne. And they said, teach that to us. And he said, not unless I know management is on board. And Sure enough, they were. And Deming became one of the most famous people in Japan, and is one of the people credited with Japan's move to world economic power status. Well, by the time the 1980s came along and he started to get well known in the US, Ford was in trouble. Coming off the disaster of the Ford Pinto, between 1979 and 1982, Ford lost over $3 billion. And in the 70s and 80s, that was more money than it is now. And with all of that, they were teetering on the edge. And in desperation, their head of quality control called Deming. And Deming said, "Are you the president of Ford?" And the head of quality control said, "No, I'm not." And Deming said, "Okay," and hung up the phone. Kept calling back and said, and Deming finally said, "I'm only going to work for a company if I know the CEO's on board. If you want me enough, the head of Ford will call me." And sure enough, they did. Well, Deming came in, and he was not known for being a nice guy, and started and immediately told them that 85% of what was wrong with their company was management. And then he got nasty. But he then started to get practical. And one of the things he did was benchmarking. Now, Ford they desperately needed a successful car, especially after Pinto. And so what they did is they established a benchmarking effort. With customer research, they identified some 300 characteristics that at least some car buyers cared about or that would influence their buying decision. For each of the 300 characteristics, they went out worldwide and they identified the absolute best car in the class, regardless of price, for that one single characteristic. And they bought those cars, they reverse engineered them. And that data, along with customer research on the priority of these 300, that is the mechanical process, the benchmark-driven process that resulted in the Ford Taurus. It was an award winner. It turned Ford almost within a couple of years. They went from $3 billion in losses to the most profitable car company in the country. And in the 4 years of the first generation Taurus, it sold more than 2 million cars. That's benchmarking 2.0. Instead of just using the benchmark data, just letting it sit there and then doing what we do to improve it, now we're taking the benchmark data and integrating it more actively into the product itself. We're getting more value out of the concept of comparison. But what if we could compare apples to oranges? Well, they're both fruit. You can make juice out of them. They're sort of reddish or orangish. You can find they're both round-ish. They both have a leaf coming out of the top. The question then becomes, are those similarities of potential use, potential insight? What can we gain from that information? We can use this kind of analysis, not merely for internal improvement, but for active creative inspiration. And so we're going to think outside the apple and go ahead and embrace the orange as well. Now, in my marketing role, every year, we at TSR would bundle up and head to New York in February for the American International Toy Fair. Now, in most shows, most trade shows, if you can get in, you can go look at everything, but not in the toy business. Most of the larger companies, including TSR at the time, have showrooms in these two buildings known as the Toy Center, located in down on Fifth Avenue, right across from the Flatiron Building. And so we would go there and spend several weeks in beautiful New York February weather. Now, this was 1984. And in 1984, there's always one hot toy of the year, and that's the one nobody can get over Christmas. And that's because we have long international supply chains, and all of the orders have been written, and everything has been ordered. And even if there's great demand at the last minute, it's too bad because they can't get product there in time. Now, the previous Christmas, that hard to get toy was Cabbage Patch Kids. And they'd been a little craft thing, and then they'd been bought by Coleco. Then they became a huge, huge fad. Now, one thing about the toy business is that if you have a successful product, one of the things that you can immediately expect to happen is ripoffs. Now, when we weren't working directly, we always wanted to go around the show and see what else was there. And even though, let's face it, Cabbage Patch wasn't really the kind of thing that we at Dungeons and Dragons were that interested in, but again, we wanted to know what was going on in the overall market. And so I was going around. My boss at the time, a guy named Jack. Jack was an ex-Hasbro executive, and so knew everybody in the toy business. He was a wonderful mentor and a great source of information and insight. And this is one of the things I learned from Jack. Now, we were wandering around showroom to showroom, and as I said, the Cabbage Patch was the hot toy the previous year. And so somebody obviously thought, with benchmarking in mind, the broccoli bunch, right? Creative, right? So here we have there were actually riots in stores when parents couldn't get the Cabbage Patch Kids that they wanted. But here you can see the broccoli bunch. They premiered at this toy fair. They were off market by 1985. They are highly collectible only because they're extremely rare. And even though I did some research, I couldn't even find the name of the manufacturer. So this wasn't exactly the hit toy. Well, okay, I saw broccoli bunch, and I couldn't help myself, and I made some sarcastic remarks to my boss, and he said, "Oh yeah, that's incredibly stupid. This is a terrible ripoff." He said, but the problem is not that it's a ripoff. That's okay. It's that it's bad. It's not creative. He says, in fact, let me tell you, there is a great Cabbage Patch ripoff at the show. See if you can find it. Well, again, dolls were not really our business, but I had been challenged. So over the next couple of weeks, when I had time, I went around and I looked at every doll in the show, and you believe me, there are a lot of dolls. And I could find some things I thought were brilliant, and I could find some things I thought were ripoffs, but I couldn't find anything that combined the two. And so eventually I gave up. I asked, all right, tell me. He said, all right. He said, you have to understand the retailer, because that's the key to the toy business. He says, retailers have needs. They need product that's brand new, completely original, because if it's just like everything else, it won't sell. But merchandising, where to place things, how to design the store, that's absolutely key to sales. And if it's too different, they don't know where to put it. And if they don't know where to put it, they're not going to buy it and it won't sell. So what a retailer truly needs is product. Oh, by the way, here's the obvious benchmarking result for this. You can see a medium-sized doll with different styles, a vegetable name, no parent, right? Hey, you know. So you can see Broccoli Bunch has a number of advantages over that. But let's go back to retailers. What do they want? They want, Jack said, product that is brand new, completely original, and just like everything else. How can that be? How can it be brand new, completely original, and just like everything else? Well, Jack said, what's the concept of Cabbage Patch? Well, as you may remember, You adopted them. They came with adoption certificates. And he looked at me and he said, what else do you adopt? And I went, aha. And here you can see little shelf talker for pound puppies. And you can even notice that it's labeled adoption station. That's the heart of the Cabbage Patch. And as a result, pound puppies, not even babies. Not doll. I mean, they're plush, but not dolls as such. They are exactly like Cabbage Patch, only completely different. Now, this was wonderful for me on a couple of different levels. Number one, because of the things that I've done, I'm interested in what I think of as industrial creativity, and that's being creative on time, on budget, and to spec. And it seems almost a contradiction in terms. Creativity is supposed to be sort of wilder and more blue sky. But ultimately, why do we care about creativity in business? Because we need product, we need things done, we need new ideas, and we need things that are relevant, practical, operational, that fit our requirements and spec. We need a brand new, completely original, and we need it to also be like everything else. So this is just a general tension that we have. Now, requirements are frequently contradictory. And human nature says that whenever you are confronted with the paradox, well, you reject it. I mean, how can you be so stupid? Brand new, original, just like everything else. There is an answer to that. There are other paradoxes. Oh, by the way, another benchmarking. Notice in here, we have, it's not a doll, but it has different styles. It's adoptable. They were cheaper individually, so you could collect them more easily. Pound puppies were also a big hit for a while. They were hard to find, and they were cheaper. All right. Brand new, completely original, just like everything else. We want thorough testing, but we don't want anything to fail because that's expensive. We need to save money. So let's see how we can spend some more. And one that we've all heard, we need you to double productivity, but we don't want an effect on quality, and we don't want increase. Actually, forget not increasing cost. We want you to double productivity, improve quality, and lower cost all at the same time. And faced with these paradoxes, well, what are we going to do? Well, Isaac Asimov had something to say about that. The time travel novel called The End of Eternity. Paradoxes can be paradoctored. And that is the fact that needs that people have, or that organizations have, are oppositional, that push against each other. Well, before we decide that it's a paradox and we could just dismiss it, we need to take a closer look, because they're not always insolvable. We've already seen how to do brand new, completely original, just like everything else. How about test thoroughly, but don't let anything fail? What is quality about? It's not inspection to get rid of defects, because inspection doesn't get rid of defects, it just keeps them away from the customer. If we lower defects by improving quality, by continuous improvement, by better design, by making sure that the steps are done right, they're done correctly, at the end of the day, we should be able to have absolutely rigorous testing of the highest quality, and things won't fail. And they won't fail because we did it right. Save money by spending more. Well, that's project management. In fact, it's CPM, the critical path method. Now, most people only know critical path method and think of it as just a name for network diagramming, and certainly network diagramming is part of it. But CPM was something more special. You may have wondered why we call it slack and we call it float, even though they're the same thing. And it really is a conceptual difference because slack comes from CPM. If you have slack in something, you want to tighten it up, right? You want to take the slack out. That brings into how to save money through increasing expenditures, crashing. Now, most people think a crash priority is a high priority, but actually that's not what it means. It's a project management term. A crash priority from CPM specifically means a priority that you plan to address by throwing resources at it. Why? We know that one way to divide projects is the relationship of resources to speed. If I need a brick wall built, 2 workers should be able to do it in half the time of 1. In other fields like creative design, extra people can make it take longer for, there's no consistent or predictable relationship. So when you have that predictable relationship, then the question is, do we put on a second bricklayer? Yes, it'll cut the time of the wall in half, but what is the effect on the project? And is there value? Well, when you can predict the effect of resources on speed, and there's a cash value for early completion, you now have a strategy for spending more to save. I was in LA for the 1994 Northridge earthquake, where the big 5-level stack interchange collapsed. It's the one the bus jumps in the movie Speed. It was an economic disaster for LA because it was the major artery into downtown, and the city calculated they were losing $1 million a day in foregone tax revenue for not having the infrastructure available. So obviously, when they went to rebuild, they cared about speed, and they picked the fastest bidder. And then after they signed the contract, they went back and they said, we'd like to offer you a bonus, $250,000 a day for every day that you beat your aggressive schedule. Is that a good idea? Well, if you're losing $1 million a day, and now you spend $250 to save $750, CPM shows you. And then from the contractor point of view, yes, they had to spend some of that $250,000 a day on extra resources to speed up the process, to shorten the critical path, to finish the project earlier. They spent a lot of money. But at the end of the day, they ended up with a $17 million bonus. And who won? Everybody. So that's project management. Sometimes when you want to save some money, open the checkbook. Not always, but sometimes. Cut the schedule in half without affecting quality or cost. Well, when people think about the triple constraint, they'll often tell you that it's time, cost, scope. I'm sorry, time, cost, quality. Did you want it good, fast, or cheap? But actually, it's not quality, cost, and time. It's scope. And the reason is scope is what you do. But quality is what they want. And it's not obvious or automatic that they're the same thing. Now, the company I worked for, TSR, we had Dungeons and Dragons. It was a huge fad hit. The guys who'd founded the company were in a little bit over their heads. They spent the money faster than it was coming in. And fads do have a life cycle. And when our fad peaked, bankers, no sense of humor. And we went through 5 rounds of layoffs, shrinking from 380 people to 80 people. There was a 50-person marketing department that was down to me. And after layoff round 5, after they fired half of creative, I got game design as additional duty while keeping all the marketing jobs. And just to make things really great, the banks said, financial benchmarking, in order to numbers that make us believe that you will be successful as a company, you have to get 65 game products out this year. 40 had been the target, fully staffed. And again, that's twice the people I had. And we had never made a 40 product schedule. 65. I can't cut quality because at best that's a temporary fix. People stop buying it. I can't spend money because there isn't any. We're practicing old Mother Hubbard economics. You know, the cupboard is bare. And I can't be late. And the reason I can't be late is that the banks were giving us money every month based on what we shipped. If I miss a deadline by one day and it's the end of the month, I cost my company 30 days of money, and that's not going to fly very much. How do I do that? Maintain quality, accomplish the scope, meet the deadline, half the staff, no money. Well, now there's a long process of this, but basically it came down to taking a look at that paradox itself. Scope isn't the same thing as quality. And it used to be our belief, I don't know if you've ever seen our stuff, but it looked more like a book or a magazine than what you think of as a conventional game. And we used to try to give people a lot of content by giving them loads of words, not much in the way of white space, a lot of data, but not attractive. We redesigned the product. More user-friendly, easier to read, more white space, fewer words. We ended up cutting scope by 40%. And you can see that that really changed the game rather substantially in terms of accomplishing the schedule. But the question is, did I cut quality? Well, now that depends. Because the more important question is, who decides whether I cut quality or not? Well, the customer. And how does the customer tell us what they think of our quality? By buying or not buying. Our sales went up slightly. And for that reason, I claim that we cut scope and improved quality at the same time. Paradoxes can be paradoctored. And that, too, is an extremely important part of benchmarking. You'd be surprised how often we're spending serious time and resources on things that nobody actually even cares about. If a job's not worth doing in the first place, it's not only not worth doing well, maybe a smarter move is not to do it at all. All right. Now, around the turn of the millennium, I was doing some work with the Weather Channel down in Atlanta. And at the time, the Weather Channel was primarily a cable channel because that's how, every 8 minutes you got your weather and some commercials. And the whole idea of the web as an active place where people would be in volume was just beginning to occur. And so they were doing a tremendous number of projects, really trying to break new ground, really scrambling because they could just see the ground underneath them shifting almost all the time. And they're used to uncertainty. I mean, the Weather Channel. Now, notice that there's some characteristics. They did know about focus. They specialized in weather. They provided other content. They wanted, they did TV and radio, and they were just, as I said, getting into web, but they were always looking for different ways to share weather data. And the thing is, most of their offerings were duplicated by other people. They just had the greater range as specialists. And frequently, if you turn on the regular news, there'll be a weather component, but it's just a few minutes. If you want to have competitive advantages, they're hard to find because it's a fairly well understood area. And we may be able to match competitive offerings, but we're really going to have to, if we want to stay ahead, if we want to be the leader, we're really, really, really going to have to find some new and interesting ways to get our story told. How can we use lateral benchmarking? People will always tell you that you should think outside the box. But that's one of those slogans that's easier said than done. How do you think outside the box? Well, in this particular case, if we're going to use the lateral benchmarking approach, there is a structured approach. How do you get outside the box? Well, we'll start by saying, let's figure out what weather data is. Remember, if we can't compare apples to oranges, but we can compare fruit to fruit. And so now the question is, how can we stretch our comparable categories for weather data to find other sources of ideas and inspiration? Well, weather data, it's raw data, it's created by the government, usually in numerical form. It constantly changes in real time. Forecasts are probabilistic rather than certain. No one needs all the information. Almost everyone needs some of the information. It can be, and frequently is displayed graphically, to be shared in multiple media characteristics. And so now we think, what other data streams could we think of that had similar characteristics? Well, I'd say the most obvious would be financial data. You can even see in the stock photograph, there are so many different ways that people take and share weather data, financial data and financial information. It is certainly not going to be the case that all of these ideas have weather analogs, but what do you think the odds are that if we spent some serious time studying all the different ways financial data is or has been displayed, could we find possibly some new ideas? Worth a shot. That's lateral benchmarking. And we could find out, even if we can't match the idea directly, we could say, how does the data affect people's decisions? How is the data routed to them? If people want data focused on their specific needs, how do we get that data to them? Because that has definite applications to the sharing of weather data. Now, at the time that I was doing this, there wasn't a lot of raw material about traffic. You know, they'd put the helicopter, you know, over the freeway and say, there's a 2-mile jam up at the so-and-so interchange because of a fender bender. I mean, better than nothing, but certainly not what we think of as, you know, high quality GPS. I think at the time, GPS had just been declassified. It was only originally available for military applications. And it was just starting to be civilian. But wouldn't traffic data be like financial data or like weather data? Have many of the same characteristics. And at the time of this, if you saw that, well, that's a whole business opportunity. And somebody saw it, or somebody's saw it, because that business opportunity did get exploited. How do you see the business opportunity? Lateral brainstorming. Traffic. It seems to me that, especially in light of everything that's happened over COVID and all of the international supply chain disruptions and all of the increasing complexity of doing sourcing and dealing worldwide, this is a chaotic system. It's very comparable, I think, in many ways to weather. And if I were in supply chain, I might study weather as a way to do better analysis. I could study finance as a way to do better analysis. I can take the information, the ideas, and the concepts from any of these and find use by laterally benchmarking into similar categories. We're just comparing the appearance and characteristics of the data stream. The subject matter doesn't matter. Demographics and modeling. There's a tremendous amount of forecasting. I'll tell you a pet theory of mine. Whether it turned out to be true or not, I don't know, and I would not base investment decisions on this. But it seems to me that there's a whole lot of real pent-up demand because we've all been sort of locked away for the last few years. And if you go back in history and you look at the great influenza epidemic, which had things like anti-mask wearing riots and all kinds, I mean, it's surprising comparables. What happened following that? The Roaring '20s, because of the pent-up demand, but inevitably followed by the Great Depression. Is that going to happen again? I subscribe to Mark Twain's idea that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. The same pressures and circumstances arise repeatedly in human history. Exactly how they play out, well, that does vary. But at the very least, if you can see the source of pressure, if you can see it building up, that does give you at least something to look at. There's an entire new discipline called cliodynamics, which is the mathematical modeling of human societies. Sort of, speaking of Asimov, sort of like a very, very early precursor to his concept of psychohistory. Interestingly, the primary researcher on this got his start in studying movement patterns and social structures of beetles, and found out there's much more similarity to humans than we'd be comfortable with. And of course, project management. As you can no doubt see, all of this directly affects project management, because we could be doing projects in any of these subject spaces. Whatever the area in which we do projects, we can find lateral comparables. We can find more benchmarks. See, when we're doing lessons learned, don't confine yourself to lessons from your own project, from your own industry, from your own company, from projects that have only surface similarities. I have a small hobby. I like to study major project disasters. Things like the Denver International Airport, Boston's Big Dig, the superconducting super collider, the F-35. However useful the final outcome was, the as projects, were they accomplished on time, on budget, and to the original spec? From a project management point of view, can't really hold any of those up as good examples. But project management is about benchmarking in so many, many different ways. In fact, one of the techniques that we use these days grows out of this sort of lateral approach, and that is the Monte Carlo simulation. And you can buy Monte Carlo plugins for just about every brand of project management software. There's probably 10 of them for MS Project alone. And what they do is they create a probabilistic model that's actually much more accurate than the old, and easier than the old PERT method. What is Monte Carlo as a simulation technique? Well, it was developed by a Los Alamos nuclear physicist to model neutron behavior in nuclear reactions. We use it in project management. If you are a political junkie, Nate Silver's 538 blog, all of his forecasts, probability of party X or candidate X winning or losing, all of it, Monte Carlo simulations. We use it there. And the last time I sat down with my retirement planner, I got a Monte Carlo simulation result of what our performance was likely to be. The lateral brainstorming takes, who would have thought that a technique designed to model neutron behavior would have so many different applications? That too, lateral brainstorming, lateral benchmarking, and in general, lateral thinking. Using lateral benchmarking, we can find radically different competitive offerings by looking at different fields and figuring out what we can port into it. I did I got to do one big, traditional plastic piece, board game for our Dragonlance product line. And honestly, benchmarking, lateral benchmarking. There is an old game, Milton Bradley game called Dogfight with World War II planes. I had dragons. And I use a benchmarking technique, exhaustive marketing research, which is my memories of having played the game as a kid. I said, what do I want? What did I want that wasn't in that game? Well, the pieces wouldn't go up and down. They were all flat. I figured out a cheap gimmick using basically checkers to measure height. And suddenly 3D movement, same thing. Notice, well, as T.S. Eliot said, immature poets, borrow, but mature poets steal. And great poets take what they steal and turn it into something better. Or at least something different. We can find new products, new services, new business opportunities. We can make sure that we know where we are against the best in class. I believe there's such a tremendous value in forcing yourself over and over and over to forcing yourself outside of whatever comfortable perspective or comfortable worldview that you normally use into something bigger and better and wilder. Constant creative stimulation. You can achieve my goal of industrial creativity. You need a good idea? Give me an hour. I've got one. Now, obviously, you shouldn't ignore traditional benchmarking, but with all of these, we can find ways to extend it creatively and effectively. And I hope you've enjoyed a little quick tour through the interesting world of lateral brainstorming and creative thinking. I want to thank you so much on behalf of myself, the Great IT Pro, Susan, and the rest of us. And I really appreciate you coming. And so, a lot of people like a copy of the slide deck. If you would like a copy of the slide deck, it'd be my pleasure to send you one, as well as answer any questions that you have. Thank you very much. And Susan, back to you.
Michael, thank you so much for your time and for presenting with us today.
And thank you, and thanks to everybody for joining us. Have a great one.